Hi there, and thanks for joining me for my latest series of recordings. Now, for this series, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be getting away from the sword and sorcery content that I usually create, and instead, we're going to do a little bit of comedy, or my attempt at comedy anyway. Now, if you want to ignore this introductory segment and jump right into the book, that's fine. You're not going to really miss anything. But otherwise, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you're going to be listening to. So, this book is going to be The Comedy Killers. This is a proof copy, which is why it's got this gray strip over it. But I don't know if you can see that okay. There it is. And so, yeah, this is it's my attempt at making a humor book. It's pretty thin, as you can see. But this is, it's all kind of it's kind of my attempt at parodying the zombie, kind of the zombie apocalypse trope, right? But instead of zombies, it's clowns. It's maybe an idea that seems a little bit dated now, but actually I started writing this way back in like 2011 or something like that. I wanted to create a short story. Back in those days, I had the idea, the title Roland Rothschild, the Clown Killer was what I was going to have it as. And I had this idea for this, kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger character that went around killing clowns, right? In that year, zombie fever was kind of at its zenith. Right, The Walking Dead was at the height of its popularity, and also at that point, clowns were kind of starting to scary clowns, I should say, were sort of working their way into pop culture. Actually, you could argue they had been there for a while, but they were really starting to become popular at that point. So I kind of started typing this story out, but I couldn't figure out how I wanted it to end. And I thought and thought about it, and I just really couldn't figure anything out. And so I just sort of sat on it. And, time came and went. And then 2016 came around. And, now 2020 has been crazy, but 2016 comes in at a close second. At that, in those days, for whatever reason, all sorts of celebrities were dying, for one thing. Like big name celebrities, like Carrie Fisher, I think, died in 2016. Lemmy Kilmister, I think George Michael. I think the guy who, Alan Rickman, I think he died in 2016. Like lots of really famous actors and celebrities. And like some people were like, well, actually that's, it just seems that way because that's how people are thinking. But if you look at a typical year, a lot of celebrities die. No, this was weird. Tons of big name celebrities were dying. And speaking of celebrities, one of them became president in 2016. And then there were the clowns. You might not remember this, but there was like a big rash of scary clown sightings. Like people were dressing up as scary clowns and hanging around cemeteries or like turnpikes at night and, going up to people's houses and generally making a nuisance of themselves. And, nobody knew they couldn't even find out who half of these people were or how they were coordinating their stints. It was real weird. And anyway, now at that point more than ever, that was the time to finish this book. And I still couldn't do it. I was just like, I can't think of anything good to write. Well, fast forward to 2019, and I finally said, all right, I got to get serious about this. The sword and sorcery genre, it's not going to make any money. It's a very niche market, and that's when it's actually written by somebody who knows what he's doing rather than a talentless hack like myself, So I'm like, well, I'm not going to make any money off of Hand of the Death God. That's not why I wrote it. I wrote it because, it was fun. But I decided to try my hand at something that maybe was that had a little bit more marketing potential. And I thought, well, I could maybe write something sort of funny. So let's dust off my old script for Roland Rothschild, the Clown Killer, and see if I can finish that up finally. So I did. Spoiler alert, it still wasn't that profitable. I tried marketing it to various agents. And it was like, imagine emailing some of these, prim and proper New York publishing types and being like, hey, I have this story about, a guy killing clowns. Do you want to buy this from me? Or do you want to help me market this? No, it's not going to work. So I just self-published the thing, but that's what you'll be listening to. Anyway, I should say, I published this in early of 2020, like January, and that was before the coronavirus hit. That was before all the protests and that sort of thing. So looking back on it now, it is like some of the jokes might not be entirely appropriate. I don't know, but keep that in mind. Anyway, I guess that's really about all you need to know about this. It's very much tongue-in-cheek humor. For the most part, a lot of the humor is maybe PG-13, but there is a lot of clown violence, just like lots of, clowns getting cut up and spurting blood, and that gets pretty gory, so it's kind of a weird mixture of humor genres. There's probably some stuff that's going to rattle a few... I wanted to say rattle a few feathers, rustle a few feathers, but by and large, it's pretty, it's pretty mild humor. So, all right. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening once again. Let's get started. Chapter 1. A world of laughter, a world of tears. Show's over. Clown. Roderick Rothschild said from between gritted teeth as he pulled the trigger on his .454 revolver. It was almost as if time itself had slowed down for that brief moment when the bullet collided with the clown's skull, which gave ever so slightly, like plastic or silly putty, before caving in to yield an entrance for the deadly projectile. And then time resumed its regular course once more as the clown's head exploded into a vibrant burst of blues, yellows, and reds. For several seconds, the now headless body of the buffoon stumbled about on its oversized shoes, its arms flailing wildly, its neck stump a spurting font of kaleidoscopic gore, before collapsing in a heap on the ground. "Clowns," muttered Rothschild as he flicked the smoldering nub of his cigar on the carcass of his most recent kill. He stood there briefly in that blasted, burned-out shell of civilization which had once been a city, to survey the carnage which he had wrought. In front of him lay the corpses of dozens upon dozens of clowns, each one stewing in a widening pool of its own polychromatic ichor. He fought back the instinct to retch, not from the gruesome portrait of death which stretched before him, but from the sickeningly sweet smell of dead clown. Cotton candy. They always smelled like cotton candy when they were killed. Roderick hated cotton candy. He paused for a moment. Roderick wasn't a pensive man, as a general rule. Rather, he was a man of action. But there, as he stood above that field of slain Pierrots, he took, in one of his rare moments of introspection, a moment to think back about just when everything had gone so wrong. "Come on, Rowdy Roddy, lighten up. It was just a joke." "I don't like jokes. And I told you, don't call me Roddy." Roderick cast aside the spring-loaded snake and fake can of peanuts, which only moments ago had been handed to him by his co-worker and office comedian, Roger. While ever the fan of peanuts and filberts, pecans, walnuts, and cashews, such practical jokery left a bitter taste in Roderick's mouth, and Roger didn't know how close he had come to losing an incisor or two, courtesy of Roderick's fist. As it was, Rothschild managed to recall the several hours of anger management therapy which he had been attending of late, and put such violent urges in the happy hole. Later, when the world as he knew it had become a hell or circus on earth, these violent instincts would serve him well, happy hole be damned, though Roderick didn't know this at the time. "Oh, come on, Roderick," Kathy, his other co-worker, said rationally as he stalked away. Roderick shrugged off the comforting hand she attempted to place on his shoulder. "Leave me alone, woman. I've got work to do." With his gawking co-workers left behind, Rothschild slid into the ergonomically designed office chair in his cubicle. He took a moment to glance at the glossy, dog-eared mini-poster of a kitten hanging from a tree branch. On it was written the cheerfully fonted message, "Hang in there." While others, Roger especially, considered it tacky, for some reason it made Roderick smile. Inwardly, that is. The muscles responsible for smiling had become weak and atrophied on his lined face long ago. He set about finishing his paperwork. Sure, the pay wasn't bad. It wasn't great either, but Roderick couldn't help but feel dissatisfied with the job. At some point, somehow, he thought, he had missed his calling. He wasn't sure what that calling was, but doing pointless paperwork day in, day out in these sterile walls, working for some kid almost half his age and paid twice as much, certainly wasn't it. But not everyone was entitled to the sort of action-packed life of adventure you see in the movies, he knew. And so Roderick Rothschild buried himself in his paperwork and pencil pushing. If anyone had seen him sitting there, hunched over his desk, they surely would have thought he looked out of place. With his military flat-top haircut and his heavily muscled arms almost bursting through the seams of his short-sleeved button-up white business shirt with sensible black tie to complete the ensemble, he looked as if someone had taken some grizzled, war-scarred veteran off the field of battle, cleaned him up, and jammed him into business clothes and a cubicle. An odd sight, to be sure. "Hey, big guy, how about getting some lunch? Or are you going to work on those papers all day?" A familiar voice broke Rothschild's concentration. It was Kathy. She was leaning on the outside of Roderick's cubicle with one arm, clad in the gray sleeve of her smart suit jacket, hanging bent-elbowed over the edge. Roderick glanced at the clock. "It's lunchtime already," he said. It wasn't uncommon for him to lose track of time when he was doing paperwork. "Yep. Golly, they really hit the gold mine when they hired you, Roddy," Kathy chuckled. "You're the only man I met who was ever able to lose track of time doing paperwork. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you actually enjoyed it." Roderick shrugged. "Not in the least. It's like purgatory for me. But what else am I going to do with my time?" Kathy raised her eyebrows as she scratched her head. "That's really depressing, but I wouldn't expect anything less from you," she said with a warm giggle. Roderick locked his computer and stood. "So where do you want to eat?" "Well, I know you don't like going there, but I have a coupon for 20% off any lunch valued at $6 or more at Benson's." "I hate that place. The waitstaff there are so damn friendly and perky. I just want to punch them right in their happy friggin' faces." Rothschild cracked his knuckles as he imagined the ridiculous waiters and waitresses at the well-known bar and grill franchise. He imagined their red and white striped aprons, their myriad buttons adorned with cutesy sayings, as the staff clapped their hands singing Happy Birthday while they circled around some dumb schmuck. They were almost like clowns, and Roderick hated clowns. "Okay, well, we don't have to go if you don't want to. It's just that the coupon expires today." Roderick looked at Kathy. She was a pretty woman, actually, with her sensible jaw-length hair and narrow, slightly sharp features. He supposed that maybe he even harbored some degree of affection for the woman, though for a man like Roderick Rothschild, that wasn't saying much. "Well, if you want to go there, we can go there, but I can't promise I won't bust my soda glass on the head of our waiter if he asks us if he can start us off with some yummy appetizers." Kathy laughed. "Ugh, I swear to God, Roderick, I can't take you anywhere," Kathy said later as the two of them walked out the door of Benson's. "I can't help it," Roderick grumbled defensively. "All that old-timey stuff they have on the wall of that place pisses me off." He felt bad about the incident that had happened inside the restaurant, but it wasn't entirely his fault. Meanwhile, Roderick eyed the clown which was performing on the street, pestering random passers-by with his balloon-twisting antics. He had been there when Roderick and Kathy had first gone to lunch, and it appeared as though the fool hadn't desisted in his comedic molestation of pedestrians. "But that's just the thing, Roderick. You can help it. You always say you can't, like you're not accountable for your behavior, but the bottom line is, you're no different from the rest of us. I mean, there's not a day goes by I don't want to punch that jerk Ricky right in his coffee-drinking face, but I don't. It's called restraint, Roderick." "Right, but the world needs to be shown that not everyone's going to put up with someone else's crap all the time. That waiter needed to be taught a lesson." The clown whipped out a fresh balloon, quickly filled it up, twisted it into the shape of something that looked like a cross between a dog and a giraffe, and handed it off to a passing businessman. The businessman, in turn, feigned gratitude with a quick, pained smile as he accepted the latex abomination and continued to hurry on his way. Roderick hoped the clown stayed the hell away from him and Kathy. If it was one thing he hated more than anything else, it was clowns. Even now he fought to restrain his loathing. Kathy continued on. "Actually like that sort of thing. It makes them feel happy, and... Hey, are you even listening to me?" "Sorry," Roderick admitted. "I was distracted by that... He fought to spit the word out, but it stuck in his gullet. He almost choked on the word. Clown. Kathy finished his sentence for him, then sighed in resigned exasperation. Oh, Roderick, I like spending time with you, but sometimes I really... Bacon! Shrieked a voice suddenly. Roderick's head snapped up just in time to see the clown seize the arm of another passing businessman, who attempted, futilely, businessmen were always a bit weak, to withdraw the limb. Bacon! Shrieked the clown again as it buried its teeth deep into the flesh of the man's arm. Yah! Shrieked the businessman. The gray fabric of his suit became dark red as the blood flowed from under the clown's teeth. Son of a gun! Roderick exclaimed as he dashed forward. At this point, all rational thought had removed itself from his mind. Roderick Rothschild was now a man of pure action. By the time he closed the distance, other passers-by had managed to pull the clown from its victim, who now sat slouched on the concrete, pitifully moaning as he cradled his badly bleeding arm. The clown, however, was not vexed and fought back with an almost bestial savagery. Roderick could see the light of insanity in its eyes as blood dripped from its teeth. The creature laughed maniacally as it lashed out with its white-gloved hands and big-shoed feet, keeping any interlopers at bay. And was it just Roderick's imagination, or did the clown seem to have a bit of a boner? Hey, clown, suck on this, Rothschild said when he had gotten within striking range. The clown's smile suddenly vanished the moment it saw Roderick's hairy, ham-like fist speeding toward its face. Crunch! The entertainer's countenance blossomed into a flower of paint and flying teeth as the blow connected directly with the creature's garish red smile. Geez, someone get this guy to a hospital, a bystander exclaimed. But Roderick wasn't paying attention. His focus was centered on the clown, who, to his unpleasant surprise, had taken the blow like a champ. Instead of crumpling to the ground, it recovered, turning its ruin of a painted face back to look at Roderick. There were few times in his life when Roderick Rothschild had been frightened or surprised enough to elicit his instinctual flight response, but in that moment he almost ran. It was a point in his life he wasn't proud of and would always remember. You see, to Roderick Rothschild, the face of a clown was not a thing that brought laughter or fine childhood recollections. No, to Roderick Rothschild, the face of a clown was an incarnation of everything perverse about mankind's nature. Happiness turned to sadistic insanity, laughter to the maniacal shrieks of the damned. And in that moment, when he gazed upon the clown's bruised and swollen face, he looked upon the stuff of nightmares. But Roderick stood his ground, clenched his fists, and gritted his teeth. He'd be damned if he was going to let some bozo get the better of him. I'm a naughty clown, the jester said in a voice that sent chills down Rothschild's spine. It wasn't the voice one would expect from a normal human being. Rather, it sounded as though the creature had inhaled too much helium. The clown flexed the fingers of its white-gloved hands and prepared to pounce at Rothschild, but Roderick was quicker and reacted with a vicious kick to the clown's groin. It may not have been a gentlemanly move, but the way Roderick figured it, when you were fighting with a clown, all civility was out the window. Oh! Groaned the clown. Its eyes crossed as it doubled over, holding its hands over its naughty bits and opening up its face to a vicious combo of punches from Roderick. Smack, smack, pow! The office worker's fists drummed out a savage cadence on the fool's face, the final strike of which sent the creature reeling backwards where it collapsed into a polka-dotted heap on the pavement. Clowns, Roderick growled as he cracked his knuckles. He turned to see what was happening with the victim. Witnesses to the crime, Kathy included, bless her heart, had gathered around him and were tending his wound. Hey, buddy, you okay? Said a hot dog vendor who had hurried over to help. How do you feel? Asked another. The businessman, meanwhile, had reverted into a balled-up, crouching position. His face was hidden. Geez, Roderick thought. It was just a bite. Sure, it was a pretty vicious bite, but man up. I feel, muttered the businessman. Wacky! Suddenly, his head snapped sideways to reveal a horrible sight. His face had changed. Where once there was a nose, now there was a bulbous red orb. Where once there was a mouth, now there was a ghastly red rictus grin. His skin had turned to a deathly white, and, before Rothschild's eyes, the businessman's hair, only moments before kept in check by a sensible haircut, began to spring out of control and change to a garish shade of red. Everyone get back! He's gone bozo! Cried Rothschild. He dashed forward in a frantic attempt to scatter the gathered onlookers, but he was too late. Before Roderick got the chance, the business clown struck, sinking his teeth into the arm of a hot dog vendor. I don't know what kind of meat they're made of, but they taste so good, it exclaimed as it withdrew its bloody mouth from the arm of the shrieking worstmonger. Meanwhile, the first clown, whom Roderick had foolishly thought out of commission, rose to its oversized feet. Everyone loves a clown, so why don't you? It said in that ghastly, high-pitched voice. Some of its teeth were missing, making its smile resemble a series of piano keys. Suddenly, the sound of screeching brakes and crashing metal could be heard off in the distance, followed by a car alarm. Roderick looked back and forth between the two clowns quickly, momentarily panicked, as his strategic brain adjusted itself to the rapidly spiraling out of control situation. Which clown was a more immediate threat? Then a shriek rang out from a nearby alleyway as a young man in a denim jacket dashed out into the street. Trailing close behind him was, to Roderick's horror, yet another clown, a particularly fat specimen in a checkered clown suit. It chuckled with a brand of greasy lasciviousness as it bounced after its prey, and was surprisingly light of step and fleet of foot. The man, by contrast, was panicked, and not thinking clearly. He clumsily tripped on a curb and spilled onto the pavement. Roderick looked on in hopeless horror as the creature descended on the man as a ravenous hyena would bear down on an injured gazelle. It was as if Roderick Rothschild had been pulled from the quiet life he once knew and thrown in the middle of his worst nightmare as, all around him, pandemonium began to break loose. Everywhere alarms and sirens began to go off while, meanwhile, the streets began to echo with the screams and chuckles of ill-willed Mary Andrews. That was the beginning of the end. No one knew just from where the clowns had come. Some said they were the result of a failed government experiment in tomfoolery. Others maintained that they were rejects, spit out of the mouth of hell for being too annoying. Whatever the case, it didn't take long before the entire country fell to the bozos. Everyone had been so busy worrying about the impending zombie apocalypse that they had failed to foresee and prepare for the much more real threat of the clown apocalypse. And, unlike zombies, clowns were quick, vicious, zany. With their efficient means of mass transit, coupled with their resilience to physical damage and verbal criticism, they toppled city after city in droves. And it wasn't just the United States that fell to the clown menace. All around the world, communities were reduced to ruins. Some fell more readily than others. Britain, for example, with its signature dry humor, put up a valiant fight, but in the end, a clown prince sat upon the once noble throne. Most of Asia, by contrast, fell quickly, as their penchant for lowbrow scatological humor and slapstick made them all too vulnerable to the hordes of invading buffoons. In time, Roderick saw the life he had once known crumble apart, much like the buildings and infrastructure of the city around him. All his acquaintances and family disappeared. The unfortunate ones were killed by the clowns outright. The less fortunate were forced to become clowns themselves. For this latter group, death was a blessing to free them from becoming a perverse and twisted funhouse reflection of the people they once were. Roderick had carried out more mercy killings than he dared to count. Where once Roderick Rothschild battled traffic during the morning commute and paperwork during the afternoon, now he battled clowns day and night. He had become a drifter, moving from one burnt-out city to another. He didn't know why exactly. It just seemed like the best thing to do. The only thing to do, really. Maybe he thought he'd find a safe haven that was free of fools, or maybe he thought he'd find some kind of solution to this whole problem. He really didn't know. More than anything, however, it somehow filled him with a sense of purpose that filing reports never did. Instead of the daily routine of tacking away on a keyboard, slurping coffee, and staring at the walls of his cubicle, he now lived by the gun and the knife. Every moment of every day was a challenge for his razor-sharp wit and iron sinews. If it was one thing that Roderick Rothschild was better at doing than filing reports, it was killing clowns, almost as if his seething hatred for shenanigans endowed him with superhuman drive, strength, and skill to hunt down and exterminate buffoons wherever they capered. He had learned to use almost any kind of firearm, taking to them as a carpenter to hammer and nails. He had honed his martial arts skills to a razor's edge. He had mastered the art of making improvised explosives and booby traps, which could turn a whole comedy troupe of farceurs into a twisted pile of smoldering limbs, giant shoes, and red noses. But there was something more that made Roderick Rothschild the perfect clown slayer. He had found out very early on that whatever it was with the clowns that caused them to turn ordinary people into raving, slathering, green-haired, red-nosed murderers didn't work on him. He wasn't sure why. One thing he did know, clowns didn't like to bite him. There was something in his blood which they found unpalatable, like lutefisk, he heard them say. But even when they did manage to get a big painted clown mouth full of Rothschild, it didn't seem to have any effect on him. It was probably because he didn't have a single jolly bone in his body. He was all business through and through, and these days his business happened to be killing clowns. Business was booming.